Welcome to Unconscious Bias, a microlearning from Screen Access Alberta. This video is part of a series to help you foster more inclusion on set for all types of productions. To learn more about Screen Access Alberta's commitment to diversifying Alberta's film and television industry workforce, visit our website at screenaccessalberta.ca/equity. Unconscious bias is an issue that affects everyone because we all hold biases that may be less obvious to us. And unless we work to uncover them and realize the effects they have on our interactions with others, they're going to remain unconscious. Biases can limit our efforts to be inclusive, welcoming, and supportive to people in their full diversity. This video will explain unconscious bias, how it works, and how you can take action to disrupt its patterns. So, what is unconscious bias? Well, the human brain deals with an enormous amount of information at every waking moment of the day, from the shapes and colors of the objects around us, to the smells in the air, and to how we interpret someone's words, facial features, and gestures. Our brains are wired to take shortcuts to help deal with all the information coming in. And sometimes these shortcuts are helpful, like knowing that a flat-topped object covered in sheets and pillows is most likely a bed and is probably a pretty comfortable place to lie down. But a slithering legless animal on the ground is most likely a snake that might attack, so maybe you want to back up. A popular recent example of how ingrained these brain shortcuts are is the TV show Is It Cake? On Is It Cake, judges try to guess if an object is real or a cake version of it. And this challenges the shortcuts we've built in our brains that categorize information and allow us to figure out what is real. But when it comes to interacting with people, these shortcuts and categories can do real harm. Essentially, shortcuts can lead to snap judgments, and from these, we will make decisions. Now, these snap judgments are based on years of socialization, the things we are taught and the patterns we pick up on, based on the behaviors, attitudes of those around us. And really, another way to describe these snap judgments or shortcuts is bias. Bias is the tendency to see something or someone in a certain way. It can be positive, negative, or neutral, but in all cases, bias is based on assumptions and socialized attitudes, not on facts. There are two types of bias, implicit and explicit. Implicit bias is subtle and shaped by existing in the world. We're most often unaware of this bias, and it is unconscious. Explicit bias, on the other hand, is an attitude or a belief that we have that we are fully aware of and make a conscious decision to believe. So, why do we have biases? Well, in short, because we're human. No one is free of bias simply because we wouldn't be able to function without using shortcuts to process information. We see things we don't even know we're seeing. Our brains try to find patterns to make sense of the millions of pieces of input we get every day. So bias, including unconscious bias, isn't inherently bad, but it definitely can be bad when it reinforces stereotypes or practices of discrimination toward or against individuals and groups of people. There are dozens of categories and types of bias. I'm not going to go over all of them today, but let's highlight common ones that often inform our day-to-day lives. Affinity bias is a preference or a positive bias toward people who look like us, or sound like us, or have similar interests as we do. Essentially, we feel a pull toward or an affinity for people who remind us of us in some way. We're less likely to see their faults and more likely to see their potential. Now, while this may not seem bad, it does perpetuate discrimination by unconsciously creating in-groups and out-groups. By favoring people who remind us of ourselves, we disadvantage those who don't. They're subject to more scrutiny in job interviews and performance evaluations. Their mistakes tend to face more consequences than those who benefit from affinity bias, and their potential isn't often as easily seen. Affinity bias can have real implications in the workplace, from when we choose to hire, who we hire, who's taking on more responsibility, or who has access to mentorship opportunities. Attribution bias is our tendency to see the best in ourselves and in those close to us, while not granting the same generosity to others. For example, when we lose our job, it's usually due to downsizing or bad management. But if a neighbor we don't know well loses their job, well, maybe they're just lazy or a bad worker or have a bad personality. Appearance bias, or the beauty bias, is an extremely common type of bias, and it happens when we judge people because of superficial factors related to how they look. This can include physical features like body size and shape, hairstyles, clothing choices, tattoos, or piercings. As we've talked about, people tend to make snap judgments based on very little information. Signals in someone's appearance and our socialization about what those signals mean often inform our first impressions about them. If someone is muscular and trim, appearance bias might tell us that that person is healthy. If someone has a bigger body, appearance might tell us that that person is unhealthy. The truth is, we know nothing about these individuals' health, lifestyle, or genetic predispositions for longevity. Well, it might seem that appearance doesn't apply to an on-set casting crew. It absolutely does. It affects who we think can play certain roles or fill certain positions. We might assume someone is a better actor if they're good looking. Only tall people can carry a boom mic. People without tattoos or facial pairings will reliably show up on set. Now, we also have confirmation bias. Have you ever wondered if green cars are common and then all of a sudden you start to see green cars everywhere? Yeah, that's confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the tendency of our brains to look for or favor information that backs up our own impressions or biases. We place more value on information that supports our existing beliefs than we do on information that contradicts them. And this can lead to further entrenching existing beliefs and discrediting new information that might ask us to see the world differently. For example, imagine that a person believes that left-handed people are more creative. Well, whenever this person encounters someone who is both left-handed and creative, they're going to place greater emphasis on this evidence that supports what they already believe. Confirmation bias is actually one of the most insidious unconscious biases we hold because it reinforces all of our other biases. It builds a foundation of opinions rather than facts, and that limits our ability and willingness to accept new information. Now, conformity or bandwagon bias is the probability that individuals will start to believe an idea or an opinion to fit in with the group. This is a common bias that we see show up in hiring. If one person on a hiring team who is very for or very against a candidate, others will conform to that idea or allow it to affect their opinion. This is particularly true if those people hold some degree of positional power. And when groupthink happens, members tend to start accepting the same biases as others about what is possible, about what should be done, about who is suitable for a certain production, and it really starts to limit our ability to explore new options and ideas. And while each of these biases is unique, they can compound in different situations. Say, for example, a friend asks if you would be willing to mentor their cousin. You like your friend, and assume they're only going to suggest their cousin if they have some potential in this industry. Your affinity bias might immediately kick in because of your friendship and assumptions. You start to think about what roles they might be able to take on set, based on what little you know about the cousin. You bring them on set and you look for how well they can complete their assigned tasks. Well, that's confirmation bias coming in because you're expecting them to do well. If you're celebrating successes while overlooking initial stumbling blocks, we're facing some other biases. At the end of the day, we all want to bring the best people on set. And in order to do that, we need to be understanding what our biases are, how they inform the on-set world we're working in, and how we can disrupt these biases so we can build more equitable sets for everyone. Our biases move from thoughts to action. As we've discussed, biases tend to work together to reinforce one another. That process leads to biases becoming deeply entrenched in our belief systems over time. Our own biases move from being preferences or preconceptions to something we perceive as truth. When we believe something, our behaviors start to follow. Our beliefs that are rooted in biases can create intentional or unintentional privileging or favoritism toward other people and be exclusionary or harmful towards others. And the most common of these beliefs and actions in our society start to become entrenched in the world around us. Those elements allow discrimination and exclusion to manifest itself at a systems level, with institutions shaping their work based on discriminatory policies and values. For a creative industry, groupthink and biases are one of the last things you want to have happen. So, if we know about biases and how they can become systems level problems, why do we still let them lead our decision making and our actions? Well, fundamentally, our brains are wired to keep us safe. And when we sense signals of a lack of safety, our brains start a whole process founded on fear. And fear provokes self-preservation instincts and a focus on security. All living creatures who experience fear experience this, and we start to work from our gut instincts and we start to seek security. This means we start making quick decisions, and quick decisions tend to rely on our own unconscious biases. It's the primal part of our brains at work. And when we operate in a space of self-preservation, we are more likely to lean into our own personal security at the expense of community security, creating in and out groups. And this continues the cycle of focusing on fear, reinforcing in our brain patterns of behavior that are fear-based rather than fact-based. Now, all industries and all workplaces have to contend with bias, and the film and television industry is no exception. In fact, there's a lot of systems at play in the industry that create opportunities for bias to continue. First is the network-driven reality of this industry. Many productions hire people based on whom the producer or director knows, and your network is key in knowing about and being considered for jobs, especially as a crew member. Now, every role, on screen or off, and every production is different, but in a comparatively small industry like Alberta's, your reputation and network can be the key to gaining access or being excluded from opportunity. Biases like affinity bias can lead to limited opportunities for some people and ample opportunities for others. That's what happens when the same people get hired to each project. Bias also plays into how we think about one another's on-set skills. Have crew members made assumptions about how to light a scene that doesn't account for an actor with a darker skin tone? Have all the grip jobs been given to men by default? And bias can also affect the physical and the psychological safety for the cast and crew. Are available bathrooms gendered? Are they big enough for people with larger bodies or who use mobility aids? Has consideration been made for whether the place or the content of what is being filmed might be emotionally charged or activating for some cast and crew members? Has the safety of getting to and from set been considered through the eyes of the diverse people working on set each day? And finally, bias can show up on set and on screen. Are the stories we are telling and the characters we are representing wholly realized? Or are they based on stereotypes and assumptions? Are they perpetuating false ideas about different groups of people? Asking the questions ahead of time is worth it. As you can tell, thinking about bias is really about raising questions. What makes us think the way they do? Is anyone being excluded, intentionally or not? Could we do things differently to make our production more welcoming for everyone? While it's important to understand how and why bias happens, it's just as important to know how to manage and minimize it so we can expand the in-group by creating safer and more equitable spaces for everyone. Because bias can move from individual thoughts and actions all the way to systems, we need to manage and minimize bias in how we think and act. And most of all, we need to do it in how we create, contribute to, or benefit from systems. Okay, let's turn our attention back to exploring how bias is linked to fear and our instincts for self-preservation. And let's look at how media and those in power can manipulate those fear responses to get what they want and to further solidify their own power structures. So, media can prompt strong negative emotions by focusing on controversies, and that can draw attention and gain money. But you can also weaponize intense negative emotions, including fear, anger, disgust. And while these may generate more attention and more money, they can also reinforce harmful stereotypes and biases in the broader community. Another way that power is maintained is to direct public attention to a sensational topic that distracts from another less sexy but equally or more important topic that is affecting people's day-to-day lives. We see this often with algorithms. Algorithms are great to help us find content that interests us, but they can be reshaped to prey on bias. And this means creating rabbit holes and echo chambers to get content to audiences that are primed for it. And so, while there's no question that algorithms can help you market to an audience that might be interested in your production, they can also lead to insular thinking, conformity, and confirmation bias, which can ultimately result in extreme or discriminatory beliefs. Now, power structures are also maintained by continuing in and out groups. Through sharing experiences and biases, we can maintain existing power structures and social divisions. And then finally, biases are often used to exploit bodies, to sell products, or to promote services. And by doing so, they create unattainable beauty standards. Marketers use their depictions of beauty to play on biases of confirmation, of in and out groups, and attraction by using the attractiveness of influencers to sell products, make you feel like one of them, and convince you to attach yourself to an image. Once you think about the way biases can be used to shape our thinking, you can take control by critically thinking before making some decisions. All of this is important to know because media also has the power to interrupt bias, to challenge how we think about ourselves, one another, and our communities. In fact, stories are one of the most powerful ways we share messages. So, when developing what you want your story to say and how you want to tell it, think about how you determine what's true. Think about the stories you've seen, heard, or been told, and look for information that might be meant to engage biases, such as claims of certainty that are too certain. You can spot these because they leave out contradictory facts or viewpoints. They quiet opposition, or they leave out how data or research methods are limited. These could include personal character attacks, or they ridicule targets or threats or the opposition. Information that is presented out of context, such as highly edited content or distorted data that frames the creators in a preferred or beneficial way. Some stories will use overblown language and content or make emotional appeals that target people's biases and prejudice just to gain support. And you may come across false logic or false arguments. And these happen when connections and conclusions have no evidence or real rationale to back them. And distorted data, not changing units in a graph or distorting the slope, can make data look more convincing than it truly is. Remember, critical thinking will help you tell or analyze a story. Remember, media shares a story, but it's an interpretation. When thinking through a story, be it news, a documentary, fiction, or any other, consider which voices are missing and whose perspectives are left out. And make sure to ask if any stereotypes, assumptions, or other biases are informing how the story is told or even your own interpretation of it. As we said before, a big part of thinking about and challenging biases is to ask questions. Because bias is built on shortcuts or patterns our brains make to help deal with the massive amount of information around us all the time, we need to think about how to make new patterns based on facts as we know them, not on assumptions, stereotypes, or other misinformation. Like a river carving streams through rock, our thoughts create worn paths in our brains. The more often we have the same thought, the more worn that path becomes. Now, creating a new path takes more energy and intention than following the one that's been worn out by that river for decades. It's hard, but you can change your thinking. So try one or more of these practices to train your brain and form new neural pathways to change your thoughts, reactions, decisions, and worldviews. Use your conscious thoughts like a dam that stops the flow of water on an old path and moves it in a new direction. Be intentional by learning about topics you feel strongly about. Read, research, interview experts, and try other methods that challenge your thinking. Practice regular self-reflection. Consider how your own thoughts and beliefs inform your actions, and how your thoughts have taken root. In a similar way, be mindful. When you're present when dealing with others or making important decisions, you can stop floating down the river, to make a more conscious decision about the path you actually want to take. One way to calm your thinking, especially when you're in an urgent situation, is just to breathe. A delayed in and out breath will physically calm your body and your brain. And lastly, use your wonderful artistic side to spark your innovation. Creativity can help get you out of your comfortable thinking and open your mind to new ways of thinking. Disrupting yourself is really powerful. Okay, let's sum up. Our brains deal with a lot of content, and making shortcuts can help us wade through all of that information. But they can also keep us stuck in thought patterns that may be biased. The good news is that we can work our way out of old patterns to uncover, identify, and disrupt bias in our personal, social, and workplace settings. First, we can be aware that we have biases, and we can use tools to help us uncover them. The trickiest part about unconscious bias is that it's, unconscious. those biases have made deep grooves in our brains. So we need some external checks and balances to help us know how we might be favoring some people over others. One of the best and easiest tools to use is the Harvard Implicit Association test, which is actually linked on the Screen Access Alberta website. Next, we can question our first impressions. Often our quick reactions come from listening to our biases, but it's our second thought or our choice of action that shows who we are and what we value. By questioning our first impressions, we challenge those intrinsic innate biases. We ask ourselves, are we sure what we think is true? Or have we maybe already started to tell ourselves some stories that might be mostly fiction? Third, we can also make sure we can clearly justify the decisions we made. Make sure we have evidence that is objective and documented about why we hired certain people or made certain casting decisions. That allows us to look back and identify if bias actually was seeping into the process. Fourth, we can make our work toward objectivity clearer by setting up success criteria that we can measure. This can mean using qualitative data like cast and crew surveys and feelings of safety on set, or quantitative data like production budgets and schedules. But understanding and hearing from cast and crew about their experiences will reduce space for subjectivity in decision making, as well as thinking ahead of time about what actions will trigger a response from the production's leaders. Next, clear, consistent communication of process details and expectations before and during the production is incredibly helpful. Clear communication creates a more transparent environment where everyone knows what is acceptable and what is not. Use plain language and make sure information is posted where cast and crew can find it and understand it. Making time to make information easy to get helps build trust, and making spaces more equitable will allow that trust to grow and flourish. Accountability includes defining roles and responsibilities and setting timelines and reasonable expectations for work. When we're clear from the start about what we are expecting of cast and crew, those same people can feel valued, welcomed, and like they have been set up for success. The same happens when everyone knows how to report safety concerns. And all of this may feel like production leads are responsible for everything that happens. But think about it this way. Leadership sets the conditions. And everyone on set has a responsibility for making those conditions real. When everyone's scope of accountability is clear, we take more of the wind out of attribution bias. The sense of fairness, that decisions have been thought through, encourages everyone to do their best because it's their efforts being recognized, not their connections. And finally, we can and should ask people for advice. Reach out to people who have done the work. Ask people we trust if they've noticed us making biased decisions, or ask about a specific incident. Remember, unconscious biases are unconscious, so getting outside points of view will tell us what we may have missed. We all have the power to make changes that our productions and our lives even better. All right, that's it for this microlearning. Thank you for taking time to learn more about unconscious bias and ways to disrupt it to promote better on-set inclusion. For more information, microlearning videos, and resources to help build inclusive on-set experiences, visit the Screen Access Alberta website at screenaccessalberta.ca/equity.